The third perspective or conception that the book talks about is the critical conception. The critical conception, at least in my mind, fits more in line with the social construction of reality, the subjectivist or perspective. Um, for the critical conception, is deviance is based on the socio-economic, political statuses in society. Um, and therefore behaviors or conditions are not inherently deviant. What they're saying here is that power matters in how we define what deviance actually is. So deviance is established by those in power. They use deviance to maintain and enhance that power. And this is really where we need to dive into issues like gender, class, social status, race, ethnicity, sexual preference. These are all being defined by those in power as more or less deviant. And those in power are using their positions of power to construct the other as less than worthy and or deviant in reference to what the social norms are at the time. A great way of thinking about this is the civil rights movement. White people in the up into the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, 1965, considered their behaviors to be appropriate. The lynchings, the violence, the oppression that this group brought to people of color was seen as socially appropriate. And those that were struggling to be seen as equal were constructed as deviant. So those engaging in nonviolent civil disobedience were constructed as being deviants, even though their actions very well could have been socially just. So when we think about these categories, there's some basic ways for you to remember them. The positivist perspective or the normative perspective. The assumptions are there's a general set of norms of behavior, conduct, and conditions on which we can agree on. That may or may not be the case, but that's the way this particular conception defines deviance. For them, deviance is a violation of a rule understood by the majority of the group. And the types of research questions that might come out of this are, what leads an individual to engage in deviant behavior? The relativist or social constructionist perspective is saying that nothing is inherently deviant. Our understanding of the world is in constant negotiation between actors. So what was deviant yesterday could be socially reconstructed as not deviant tomorrow. Their definitions of deviance is any behavior that elicits a definition or label of deviance. Sounds a bit tautological, but we get into some interesting places when we're using the social constructionist perspective. And then some of the types of research questions: what characteristics increase the likelihood that an individual or a behavior will be defined as deviant? And then, of course, the critical perspective, which is going to be bringing into the debate issues of power, The normative understanding of deviance is established by those in power to maintain and enhance their power. When we're talking about their definitions, instead of focusing on individual types of deviance, this conception critiques the social system that exists and creates such norms in the first place. It's a much more structural approach to deviance. And then, of course, some possible questions. What is the experience of the homeless, and who is served by their treatment as being deviant? When you look at these, you find some similarities and you find some differences in how each conception views deviance. I want you to take a quick second, maybe pause this lecture and think about something that's deviant that you've done in the past. And think about how each of these may be representative of a folkway, a more, or a law. And just kind of start to try and process which conception you're using when you think about these acts of deviance. So are you using the positivist perspective or the social constructionist, or are you using the critical perspective to understand what it is, what behavior you're engaging in? So what would picking your nose be? How about breaking the speed limit? Killing someone? Cheating on a test? Lying to your parents? Each is an example of deviant behavior, but some are more severe than others. As we talked about earlier, picking your nose might be considered a breaking of a folkway, whereas killing someone is clearly breaking a law. But is it? You might be a representative of the military, and killing actually could be part of your job description. So even when it comes to our most severe categories, our most important laws, there are times that even killing someone might not be construed as deviant behavior. When we talk about deviance, we must talk about pop culture. This is another one of those things where when is important. Television, video, social media, all that stuff is relatively new in reference to societies themselves. Not that society was not influenced by pop culture in the past. It clearly was. But now that we have television, movies, and all of this social media that confronts us every day, it's taking on a new type of behavior. It's taking on a new type of importance in our lives. So when we think about social deviance in movies, TV shows, and the internet, some of the things you got to ask yourself is, what different theories can be used to explain deviant behavior, and then how do those different theories explain the deviant behavior in different ways? Another question: are there different reactions to the deviant behaviors? Of course, and why? Are social policies and social control depicted, and how? Take, for example, the Hunger Games. The Hunger Games is clearly an act of deviant behavior. You're taking children from their homes and putting them into a game where they ultimately kill themselves, or kill each other, should I say. But that action is being used is being used as a form of social control. So is this a objectivist perspective? Is this a critical perspective? One might argue that those that have the power are constructing reality in such a way that allows them to continue to keep that power. TV, for example, we are constantly bombarded with reality TV, and these reality TV shows are exhibiting deviant behavior. Things like Swamp People or The Jersey Shore, or My Strange Diction, Little Big People, Hoarders. These are all indications of deviant behavior that we are consuming on a regular basis, which then in turn makes those behaviors less deviant. And then, of course, the internet, deviance is at your fingertips. Pornography. You can at times watch people being killed on the internet. So all of a sudden, pop culture is being influenced by new forms of media that are bringing these things into our social landscape. One way to understand social deviance is the use of the sociological imagination. The sociological imagination is an idea presented by C. Wright Mills, and for any sociologist, it's really our bread and butter. What the sociological imagination is really telling us is that in order to understand who you are and whether you're ultimately deviant, you have to place yourself in the historical context. You have to understand what are the forces that are creating you the way that you are being created as we speak. And how do those social forces allow for or limit your own behaviors in your own life? The book uses an example of the salad bar and how the structure of the salad bar can ultimately limit our behavioral choices. If the structure of society only allows you to choose cheese, broccoli, lettuce, and tomatoes to create your salad, well, that's going to be the parameters for what your salad looks like when it's all said and done. The more options that you give, the more differences you will see in the expression of people's preference in salads. So if you have 3 choices on a salad bar, you're going to see less deviations from the norm than if you have 100 choices on a salad bar. So structure influences agency. The structure of society limits or allows for agents, us, to create what ultimately may be construed as deviant responses in our behavior.